Hi everyone, this is Mr. Cohn with another video on world religions. This time we're going to be talking about Islam. So in this photo here, you can see lots of different pictures and images of elements related to Islam. In the middle here, you can see the symbol, this crescent moon and the star in the middle. This is the symbol that Muslims use for the religion. And on the outer parts, you can see different images of Islam. You can see at the top left here, the Dome of the Rock at the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. Bottom right, you can see this is a picture of Mecca in Saudi Arabia. We'll talk more about that as the presentation goes on. And then the bottom left over here is a drawing of a man who is praying during Salat. And we'll talk again more about that as the video goes on. First, some basics. Believe it or not, Islam is the youngest of the 5 religions that we're going to be covering. It is, though, the second largest and the most rapidly growing religion out there. There are 1 billion people, so if you take 1 billion out of 7, roughly about 15% of the world is Islam, or is Muslim and therefore believes in Islam. And again, it is the fastest growing one out there. As I said just a moment ago, Muslims are those who follow Islam. Muslims are not the religion, despite what we've been talking about before, and despite what you may be thinking from before from our activity on culture. In the first unit, Islam is the religion, Muslim is the group of people who follow and believe in Islam. According to Muslims, Islam is the perfection of Judaism and Christianity together, which, as we talked about, are obviously the ones that have come before. That doesn't mean that Muslims believe that their religion is better. It just means that they've been able to take what Judaism and Christianity have done, combine it together, and taken the best elements of those two and adopt them for their own. Muslims do believe that themselves, Christians and Jews, are considered the people of the book. In this case, we can assume that the book is the Bible, and as we've talked about before, Abraham being the leader of the monotheistic religions, this is the third of those religions, and therefore it's why Muslims do feel that they have a very strong connection to Christianity and Judaism because Abraham was the person who did start this religion. However, as we'll get into, Islam sort of shifts away from Abraham and goes in a different direction when it comes to the prophets. Indonesia, of all places, if you believe it or not, has the largest population of Muslims in the world. So not Saudi Arabia, not any other place in the Middle East, but Indonesia. And they don't refer to God as God. They refer to God as Allah, which means God. It's the name for the Muslim God. Those who believe in Allah are those who believe in Muhammad to be the Messiah. So Muhammad was Allah's messenger or his prophet. Allah came to Muhammad and spoke to him, similar to how God came and spoke to Abraham, and God spoke with Jesus, obviously, because it was his son, and so on and so forth. And so we see Muhammad being this Messiah for the Muslim people as being Allah's messenger. So Allah is no different. It's not a different God. It's not anyone different. It's just Allah is just the name for God in Arabic. So, Islam is based around 5 major pillars. The first pillar is called Iman, which means belief. And within this, you have to understand that, as with other religions, the belief in God and belief that God is one and there is no other God and that Muhammad is the prophet is one of the most essential pillars out there. And so this idea that you decree to all that God is one, there is no other God but Allah, Muhammad is the prophet, etc., is called Shahada, which is what you see here on this first pillar here. The pillar is known as Iman, but the basic essence, the essential component of it is known as Shahada, which is this quote unquote testimony of the Islamic creed, of the things that I had just mentioned. It's essentially the confirmation that God is one. The second pillar over here is Salat, which means worship. Jews pray 3 times a day. Christians pray mostly just on Sundays, typically once a week, depending on how religious you are or how you want to go about it. Muslims pray 5 times a day, and Friday is their holy day. So we talked about how in Judaism, how Friday night to Saturday night, the Shabbat is the Jewish holy day. Sundays are just a holy day for Christianity, and Friday, the day itself, is the holy day for Muslims. Sawm is fasting. This is a key component to many religions, including Islam and Judaism. The idea is that on the holiday of Ramadan, which you see down here, it happens in the 9th month of the calendar. Usually that comes about in July, August time. Again, it's not aligned with the English calendar that we follow. And during this time, the idea of Ramadan is that you're fasting during the day because it brings Muslims to a greater awareness of God's presence. If you remember from the Judaism video about Yom Kippur, the idea of Yom Kippur is that we're supposed to quote unquote suffer a bit to reflect on the sins of the time in the past. Muslims also believe in that same importance of fasting. It's supposed to bring a greater connection, greater spirituality to God, greater focus on God's presence, and help them acknowledge their gratitude for all the things that God has given to them over the course of their lives. And so fasting, especially on Ramadan, is a very key component for many, many Muslims. So that one you see over here. Zakat is the next pillar, the fourth one. This is almsgiving. This is, in essence, charity, giving what you have. In many religions, Christianity, Judaism, there's a great belief in charity, giving to those who don't have, giving to those who are in need. And so a big emphasis is put on that in the religion of Islam. It's customary to give almost 1/3 of your entire worth within 1 year to charity and to those who don't have anything, which is a lot more than the requirements in the other religions, which shows you a great consideration that the Muslims place on helping others and giving what you're able to give to those who are in need. The last pillar is a very important one known as Hajj. This is the idea of pilgrimage, where once a year it is a requirement, or not once a year, excuse me, once in a lifetime, it is your requirement as a believer in Islam to travel, which is the idea of pilgrimage, to Mecca, which is in Saudi Arabia, to go to the holiest site. So if you're thinking about it within Judaism, you can see Jerusalem, which a lot of Jews believe in, the idea of making a pilgrimage to Jerusalem and visiting the Western Wall. Similar to in Islam with Hajj, we see a very big emphasis on making that once in a lifetime pilgrimage to Mecca to visit and to worship and to be surrounded by the holiest of cities and sites in Islam. So again, these are the 5 pillars of Islam. So we've talked about the Bible, the New Testament, and the Old Testament for the other religions. The Quran is the holy book for Muslims. Its original language is in Arabic, but it has been translated into other languages as well. Within the Quran, we see several things. The first thing we see is God's revelations to Muhammad. We see all the things that God has said to Muhammad, his requirements as this Messiah for the Muslim people, etc. And we also see, on the other part of it, the life and deeds of Muhammad and the things that he did in his day-to-day life. Similar to how you see in the New Testament and the Old Testament, how you see the life of the prophets and different people and stories and things like that. Now, within Islam, Muslims believe in something known as the bond of believers. They believe that since the Quran was originally written in Arabic, the idea is that it is the quote-unquote one and only true language of the Quran. That in order to be a believer in Islam, you need to have read it in its original language of Arabic. If you read it in English, in Hebrew, in Greek, in Spanish, and whatever other language you want to read it in, it doesn't. To them, to those who are most devout, who are the most observant of the rules, it does not count. And so you really need to be sure that you read it in Arabic if you are going to be part of this bond of believers as a very religious Muslim. So this is pronounced Quran. So there are several different traditions and something called the seal of the prophecy. On the right here you see an interpretation of what Muhammad looked like. These traditions, it's what Muhammad's sayings and deeds were. It's known as hadith. This is something that's also that goes in addition to the Quran. This is the second authority. The Quran has the highest of authority in terms of what you're supposed to do as a Muslim. Hadith, again, these sayings and deeds of Muhammad are as the second authority. So if someone does not find what they're looking for in the Quran or needs, affirmation to it or something, they'll look to the hadith to support or to challenge their thinking and to help bring some more clarity to what it is that they're supposed to do. Muhammad is considered the seal of the prophecy, meaning he is the last in line in the series of great prophets throughout time. Starting with Abraham and working itself all the way down, he is considered the last person to have spoken to God directly. It's believed that since then, no one else has had that opportunity to speak to God directly the way that Muhammad, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, etc. have had that opportunity. And so that's why he's considered the seal of the prophecy, the last great prophets in that line of great prophets. So, within Islam, there are two different sects of Islam, similar to how we have three in Christianity and three in Judaism. What is called Sunnis and Shiites. This is just a little map for you so you can see within certain areas within the Middle East and a big part of it here in Saudi Arabia, where you can see a breakdown of Sunni Muslims and Shiite Muslims. And as it says here, less than about 15% of the world are Shiite. Most Muslims are Sunni. And so you can see from this image here where you might find them in the Middle East, and you can read a little bit more about it here, but we're not going to go into it in too much depth about it right now. Here's the basic premise for what you need to understand about the difference between the two. Notice how I wrote Sunnis versus Shiites, not Sunnis and Shiites, because there has been a lot of problems between the two. Here's the basic element of it. When it comes to who is going to be the leader of the religion, obviously Muhammad is long past. He's not alive anymore, and so someone needs to be the new leader of the religion, and who should we follow? Similar to a pope, but not quite the same. Sunnis believe that the succession of Muhammad's elected successors, meaning the people that Muhammad selected to be the next leaders of the religion after him, known as caliphs, these are going to be the people who are going to lead the religion. It's not going to be any of his family members or someone just going to get elected to it. It's those who he handpicked to succeed him after he died, again known as caliphs. These were going to be the people that were going to be the leader of the religion. Shiites, on the other hand, believe that it's the head of the community needs to be the direct descendant of Muhammad. So it's not someone that Muhammad chooses, it's just someone who's next in the bloodline within his family, whether it's a son, a daughter, whoever it might be. As you might imagine, this has caused a lot of problems within Islam and how to interpret it. You may not think that it's supposed to, but it certainly has and can, and it's caused a lot of issues, a lot of violence, a lot of war, not just in the Middle East, but anywhere where you might find Muslims, especially ones who are both Sunni and Shiite. A lot of problems in those parts of the world because they cannot come to this agreement on the leadership of the religion. A last piece I want you to note are two major places in Saudi Arabia. One is known as Mecca. This picture here is of Mecca during Ramadan. As you can see, there's millions of people who are there praying and are there on the holiest site. And Medina, both again are in Saudi Arabia. These are the two, respectively, the two holiest sites in the Islam faith, in the Muslim faith. Jerusalem is the third holiest site, which is why you see what's known as Dome of the Rock or Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, just on the other side of the Western Wall, which is the holiest site for Jews. And again, if you've been paying attention to the news, or if you can imagine on your own, this has certainly caused a lot of problems between Jews and Muslims over the years, over, I would say, probably the last 90 plus years. Before that, not so many problems, but especially more recently, we see lots of issues between these two. But we'll talk more about that when we get into international conflict in our next unit. So hopefully you learned a little bit here about Islam, and we'll be talking more about it in class.